along with her association to different security initiatives nationally and internationally. She consults for special projects with national and international technology development initiatives such as XRSI and more. Next is Hannah Linderstahl. I hope I said that correctly. The CEO and founder of Earhart Business Protection Agency, a cyber intelligence specialist and that supports authorities, organizations, and private sectors with management advisory regarding cyber threats, disinformation, investigations, corporate education, as well as training. In these matters, with over 25 years of experience in combating digital and virtual threats, she has previously been an advisor for various government agencies and international organizations. Linderstahl is active in the Council for Psychological Defense in Sweden and acts as the vice president of the Swedish Psychological Operations Association, a voluntary defense organization. Next, we have Philip Ammann, the head of strategy, expertise, and stakeholder management at the European Cybercrime Center, EC3. EC3 expertise and stakeholder management is responsible for assessing and acting on relevant trends and threats related to cybercrime and cybersecurity. Other key areas of responsibility include providing strategic support to investigations, driving innovation, managing industry advisory groups, prevention and awareness, and capacity building. Philip has worked in various fields, including the financial sector, global disarmament, international investigations on issues related to safety and security in cyberspace, topics he deeply cares about, and as do I. His professional experience is complemented by degrees in business informatics from the University of Vienna and in forensics computing and cybercrime investigation from University College Dublin. Joining all of these amazing speakers is Joe Litobarski, the editor-in-chief of debatingeurope.eu, an online political discussion platform based on one simple model: citizens ask questions, policymakers and experts respond. Since its launch, Debating Europe, a project of the think tank Friends of Europe, has built a social media following of over 250,000. Since 2019, he has been running online group video discussions with EU citizens for Debating Europe and has been impressed by the depth and richness of live video interactions compared to text-based social media. He's particularly interested in the potential of the metaverse for democratic deliberation. He has over 15 years of experience as a facilitator and has been exploring the impact of new technologies on European democracy since 2008. Before he joined Friends of Europe in 2011, he worked as a freelance journalist in the UK and Brussels, as well as editing blogactive.eu, a dedicated EU blogging platform. And finally, last but not least, moderating this panel is an instrumental player in helping shape the future of Europe and the world, my friend, Senior Fellow, Peace, Security, and Defense for Friends of Europe in Brussels and lecturer for Institute of Security Governance in Monterey, also the advisor for Governance and Societal Resilience at XRSI, Chris Cremides-Courtney. Chris is a globally recognized thought leader, futurist, and policy influencer on addressing malign influence campaigns, defending democracy, and societal resilience. They led efforts to develop policy approaches to protect and support democracy, equality, and the rule of law in a fast-changing world. We're really excited to hear your thoughts, Chris, and all of these esteemed panelists. Please take it away.
Thank you so much, Kavya. It's such an honor to be here. And it's so exciting listening and watching the presentations this week. I mean, just the medical day alone yesterday was so exciting. And we can see how much promise there is with the metaverse. But for our focus here, we're looking at the societal division, the social unrest, the cybercrime and violence that's been fomented during this current era of interactive digital experiences. How can we ensure that the immersive digital era is safer and not worse? And that's what we're here to talk about. So these are some of the questions that we will be exploring. So I'd like to first turn to Philip from Europol. And Philip, if you could tell us, please, how is Europol approaching these questions?
first of all, thank you very much for having me. You know, also for the great introduction. I'm deeply impressed by the previous speakers, but also, my fellow panelists. So I do hope I can contribute to the discussions. I think, especially, listening to the previous speaker, there were a lot of points that resonate with me. And I think we at Europol EC3, obviously our main objective is our raison d'etre is to support, large, complex cybercrime cases, but also to ultimately make cyberspace safer and more secure. And I think, so for us, the metaverse is very important in the sense that we want to know, what are the opportunities, but more importantly, what are the risks and what we can do jointly to address those and minimize those risks. And so that, you heard about what we do, so we do try to understand what are threats and the trends, but also looking into the future. We've done research into artificial intelligence. We have dedicated reports on that. We've done quite recently with our innovation, with our innovation lab. We published a report on, what can law enforcement do about the metaverse and policing the metaverse, which may have a little bit of a negative connotation, but I think for me, it's really all about, if you will, online community policing. And, when Sunita mentioned the social contract, that's specifically something we're also looking into, a concept that has been around for, a few hundred years or 200 years, at least, as far as I know. And it's all this idea, what's the contract between the society, us as individuals, and, law enforcement or agencies that have special powers. And I think, actually, we did also publish a report on that together with a friend and an academic partner, Professor Mary Aiken. But we asked the question, well, where do we draw the cyber blue line? The blue line representing law enforcement and in establishing safety and security, and where do we draw that line in cyberspace? And I think what Sunita said, I think I can only repeat that. It's all of us. This has to be a collective decision. We all are part of this. We all will contribute to the metaverse and making it safer and secure, more secure. So from a historic point of view, and equally I can show my age here, I think what we really see is probably more of a convergence of different technologies, right? AR, VR has been around for decades. I'm old enough to have been, playing MUDs, multiple user dimensions, I think it was called, completely text-based. And guess what? People were already getting married, had a social life, even though it was completely text-based. I did a postdoc in Adelaide at their eLab, 2010, I think. There was a guy, using, at the time, I think it was Doom, to create an AR game where you could walk around the campus and play those monsters. So a lot of research also going on also in telemedicine in countries like Australia or Canada. So I think a lot of those concepts have been around, but what we're seeing now, I think, is that convergence. So, we're now at the stage where it becomes, if you will, the metaverse, a quote unquote reality. So I think that's and that's why I think we need to be at that stage where we say, okay, how can we from the get-go ideally design that space in a way that it's safe and secure for everyone. And looking at some of the other examples, when it comes to the risks and opportunities. So let's talk about the opportunities. And I just I won't dwell too much on those because there other people can speak better and more elaborately on the opportunity. Because we're definitely topics like digitalizations, new forms of working, new business models. We spend a lot of effort on blockchain and cryptocurrency related or criminality. So we do have a lot of expertise in that space, but there will definitely be new business models, new opportunities, new ways to be creative. We'll hopefully see some sort of platform compatibility where you can have one avatar, living in different ecosystems. I think there's really, almost endless opportunities there. But when there are opportunities, there typically are also risks, and we published in our report, we listed sort of the main risks that we've identified. Things like identity theft, things that already exist in cyberspace, in the digital world, and the real world as well, of course. Digital theft, money laundering, scams, child sexual abuse online, harassment, disinformation, terrorism, terrorist-related, financing or hate speech, the kind of impact that we will have, what kind of societal or physical impact will that have? So, the implications also of technology, I think that's, again, I think Sunita also mentioned, alluded to that. We're not really, I think, fully sure what that will mean. Somebody once coined that phrase, the internet is the largest unsupervised, psychological experiment, because we're doing things online, we're going online without really being fully aware of what the implications are. And I think the same is probably true for the metaverse. Now, when you look at the risks, again, we've seen that before. We had I think it was in 2007 in Second Life, the first child sexual abuse case and court case in Germany, 2014, the first digital theft in games like World of Warcraft. So again, the risks are, not all of those risks will be completely novel. So we can also learn from previous experience, but taking this now all together, and that's where we come in also as law enforcement. It's not about policing, because that can have, again, a negative connotation, but it's all about providing an online community service in the metaverse, addressing those risks proactively together, trying to work with industry and other partners to implement principles like safety, security, and privacy by design. What does that look like in the metaverse, and how can we again create an environment that is safe and secure for everyone? And how can we also ensure that you have a way of reporting criminal activity, getting the support that you would expect? And again, this is, and I repeat what Sunita said, this is a task for everyone. This is not for one community to decide. It's not for industry, I think, to decide how the metaverse should look like. It's certainly not for law enforcement to decide how that place should look like. We all together, everybody, every community needs to have a say in that. We need to have that multi-stakeholder governance model, I think, also for the metaverse. So with that, I'll stop with my intervention, but really grateful to be here and looking forward to the discussions. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you so much, Philip. I mean, I'm so, so happy to hear that the idea going in is a community policing model. You talked about the cyber blue line, and that it's up to all of us to establish it, not just industry, not just police. So I'm so happy, though, that Europol within Europe, and I think globally, are really leading the way and encouraging local and national police departments to take this on and start to learn about the metaverse. So I really, my hat is off to Europol for stepping out and leading on this. And thank you so much for being with us tonight. So I want to turn to Hannah. Hannah, you all heard about her background, quite broad. She travels around the world doing these things as well. And my question to you, Hannah, is how do you think hybrid actors will seek to exploit vulnerabilities in the metaverse? And what kind of new threats have we not thought of yet? So over to you, Hannah. Hannah, can you hear us? Hannah, if you're having some technical difficulties, we can let someone else go while you fix that. Okay, so what I'd like to do now, while Hannah is taking care of that, I want to go to Joe Litobarski. So Joe, we've heard Sunita talk about social contract. We've heard Philip just talk about new social contract. And my question to you is, how will the metaverse impact democracy? Will it strengthen or weaken it? So over to you, Joe.
Thanks, Chris. And thank you for the introduction. Thank you for having me today. And actually, I put together some notes about the social contract and the way that we should think about the metaverse and democracy. And listening to the other speakers and listening to the conversation so far, I sort of feel like, I'm really, on the one hand, I've got to tear up my notes because the point I was going to make has been made by all the other speakers, which is that it needs to be a multi-stakeholder approach. It needs to be kind of consultative and co-creating with different stakeholders, and kind of a social contract-based approach to kind of how we conceptualize the discussion. On the other hand, it's so wonderful to hear. It's so great that we're having, because I think this is exactly the kind of language that we need to be using. And I said, this is what I've been spending my professional life working on, is how do we do this in practice? So that's perhaps what I'll spend my opening remarks talking about, less kind of the importance of this multi-stakeholder approach, which I think everyone's on the same page about, and then maybe talk about a little bit about how we can do this in practice, because this is what I've been working on. And there've been some really, really interesting kind of deliberative and participatory kind of experiments and methodologies developed over the past several decades that I think can help us answer this question. How do we put citizens into the driving seat? How do we change the narrative away from one where society is being kind of dragged along by technology, and towards a narrative where society is not reacting to technological change, but actively kind of co-creating technology with citizens, business, and government in dialogue together. And there was this sometimes called the deliberative wave, which is these experiments in citizens' assemblies, or sometimes they're called mini publics or sortition, or citizens' panels or citizens' juries. They go by lots of different names, but it really started in the 1980s. And particularly since the 2010s, this approach has really, really been sort of turbocharged. And for example, many of you will have heard of the Irish Citizens' Assembly on abortion on constitutional change in 2016, or the French Citizens' Assembly on climate change, or Macron's Grand National Debate. These are examples of citizens' assemblies. Or at the EU level, there was the Conference on the Future of Europe, which Debating Europe, which I'm editor-in-chief of, helped to facilitate, sent two facilitators over to the Conference on the Future of Europe. And that was a large kind of pan-EU Citizens' Assembly that ran for roughly 2 years, from 2020 until May 2022. And it had an online component. It also had offline components where citizens were randomly selected. They were brought together. They discussed the future of Europe, the kind of constitutional changes that they'd like to see, and they came up with a set of recommendations. And the EU Commission President, Ursula von der Leyen, has said that she would like to see this kind of deliberative citizen consultation becoming a standard part of EU policymaking, so that it's kind of baked into the policymaking process, that citizens are consulted. You run these kind of citizens panels. And I mean, really, this has been such an exciting time to be working in deliberative democracy, because we have seen politics is so polarized, politics is so kind of angry and tribal and radicalized. There have been this space to try to break through deadlock, to try to break through the kind of tribalism and use these kind of deliberative tools to do that, particularly where you have very, very controversial or very technical or very kind of low salience, or high importance, low salience topics that you want to kind of have a kind of real deep dive into and bring people together, which is, I think, the case in the kind of discussions around the metaverse, which is why these deliberative processes are so exciting. And I bring all this up because, I mean, I think it's clear, we all agree that the challenges facing the metaverse are not just technical challenges. They're not engineering problems. I mean, there are definitely engineering problems to be solved, but I think a lot of the biggest challenges are political questions or democratic questions, and technology is always political. You've probably heard the expression that technology is not good and it's not evil, and that's true, but technology is also never neutral. It's always political, and that means technology as a designed set of tools and practices is always an expression of opinions, of values and biases and choices and priorities and so on. And mediating between these is not, as I've said, primarily an engineering challenge. It's a political challenge. So I think, you know, this social, the social contract and the idea of multi-stakeholder engagement pushes back against this idea that technology can be politics-free. And that's important because I think a politics-free technology gets us into this sort of technological nihilism, where we start having a kind of fatalistic or deterministic attitude towards technology, where, as I said, society is just being kind of dragged along, which is why we need to put this politics in technology, but it can't be a kind of negative, zero-sum, angry, tribal, kind of radicalized politics with very little common ground, which I don't actually think is really politics. It's not a healthy politics. In fact, it's almost kind of tipping over outside of politics. So instead of this, of a technocratic approach, instead of a kind of tribal or angry or polarized approach, I think we need to promote this idea of co-production of technology by society through democratic politics, and particularly through the sort of deliberative processes that I've been talking about. And we need to use these deliberative tools to ask ourselves, what sort of metaverse do we want to build together? And that means, as we've all, I think, as other speakers have said, changing this narrative, one of society being led into somebody else's and towards a narrative of citizens co-creating the metaverse that they want alongside business and government. And that means a public discussion on norms, on regulation, on values. And the final point, which I want to make, is I think that this debate that we're having around technology, and if we want to foster a kind of public debate and really engage citizens, I think it can learn a lot from the debate around climate change. So on climate change, we have seen a series of inclusive process. We've seen national assemblies in Ireland, France, as well as similar approaches at regional, at local, municipal, and even kind of drilling down right to neighborhood level, or even at the level of individual seats, the streets, sorry. There are ongoing discussions taking place on the trade-offs and the issues around a sustainable environment. And so we're already promoting national and international debates on the climate transition, and I'd love to see a similar approach taken with the technological transitions we face. So for example, a citizens' convention on future technologies, similar to the French Citizens' Convention on the Climate, could be convened. It could be at the EU level, it could be at national level, they could, you know, several could take place simultaneously. They could discuss the metaverse alongside, I think, deliberation on other technologies such as artificial intelligence, machine learning, automation, and other kind of similar transformative technologies. And such a convention can be run using established methodologies. And I guess this is the point I want to make, and I want everyone to kind of take away, is that a lot of work putting together these methodologies has already been done. So the tools are kind of out there. You know, previous citizens' assemblies have established good practices on governance, on how to incorporate expert advice, how to run random sortition, how to recruit representative samples of citizens, and you can run these. Like the more experiments that we run, the better we get at doing this sort of thing. So citizens could be asked about the future of the metaverse, about governance, regulation, the different ethical and political questions that we're all grappling with expert input as per previous citizen assemblies. And then it could come together and put together output sets of recommendations, which would, if enough of a kind of cross-section of society were involved, if the recruitment was done properly, would have kind of different perspectives involved in the dialogue, and hopefully can be used as a way to even open up this space for public debate, which can sometimes be a bit kind of technical. So I guess I'll close my remarks here with the same point that I sort of opened them with, which is that we need a different narrative around politics and technology, and we need to move away from a narrative that puts technology in the driving seat towards a narrative of co-creation and co-production of technology with all stakeholders engaged in a process of dialogue. And I think and this is the point, I think we have the tools to do this. We already have the tools to do this. We've been developing them in other areas, particularly in the climate debate. I think it's time that we applied them to the debate around technology. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Joe. You know, I had a follow-up question for you for some of the things you were talking about earlier about how to create this, and I was going to ask you how, and you've already told us how. I love this idea of a citizens convention on a metaverse. I mean, for all technology is great, but I think for this one in particular, I love that idea. And I think also, you know, your point that all tech is political. It's never neutral. And I'm really so glad today that the thread that's running through everything we're hearing today so far is that this needs to be co-created, all of society, citizens, governments, companies, police, everyone. And I think this is so important, because the last time we had a big technology advancement, in the 90s, we didn't really have that. We're too busy playing catch up. And I think what's great here is that we're anticipating that. We're looking to the future. So thank you for that, Joe. I'd like to see if Hannah is back yet. Hannah, are you with us? I don't hear Hannah. So I wanted to save Dr. Hoda for last, but I'm afraid I'll have to come to you, Hoda. And Hoda, you've been working on all these issues for some time, and I think it's really important from your perspective. After hearing all of these issues, how do we solve these challenges? Is it just a governance issue? I mean, governance itself is quite a big onion to peel. So how do we, what are the priorities for solving these issues that we're talking about here today? So over to you, Hoda.
Great question, Chris, actually. And I would carry over the same kind of advice and the same kind of guidelines that we've heard over and over again for the past 4 days, and also from our fellow panelists today. It's actually a multi-stakeholder approach. Can you hear me? Hello?
Yes, go ahead, Hoda.
Yes,
go ahead, Hoda.
Yes,
please.
Perfect.
Please.
So I would like to carry over from the same kind of advice that we have heard so far for the past 4 days from our also fellow panelists today. It is actually a multi-stakeholder approach. It is actually a technology inspection by design and a security by design kind of approach. We are living in an era where the metaverse is our tipping point. And actually it's our tipping point because it lives on all of the summits of the different questions that we have in the past. We have questions regarding privacy and security, questions around ethical AI, questions around ethical technology development, questions around as well, how can we co-design technology and make sure that technology development is not monopolized by certain actors globally, and it's not being used as a weapon when it comes to militarizing specific parts of the world against another part of the world. And the solution here is to make sure that we democratize the process of technology development and make sure that there is actually an equal access to different bodies and different entities around the world and individuals around the world to co-design and co-develop this technology. So again, I would echo the same kind of sentiment, and I would think that our solution here is to embody what we call an open R&D approach, and making sure that we co-develop even the policy and standards and regulation mechanisms that we are developing today. I mean, in most of the cybersecurity domains, it takes 18 months to develop for a security standard, while it takes seconds to attack systems, which doesn't make sense, right? I mean, like, how can we make sure in a very dynamic universe that we're living and in the metaverse, we are going to endorse the ability to as well dynamically design standards and adapt to standards and regulation when it comes to the metaverse. And regulations that are not, I would say, typical, like what we've said around social contracts. How can we make sure that social contracts can be technically embodied and technically as well developed, and how can we make sure that they're legally liable by different entities? And I would carry over as well the call for ethical contracts across board as well. And this is issues that we have faced in the past, and the way we developed technology, we had few gaps, because I think the majority of the problem or the challenge comes from the fact that technology is being developed by specific technology development companies and actors, and maybe specific research groups. So access to technology development is not widespread, and this is why we are being polarized towards a specific way of building this technology. And I think in this universe, or in the universe of the metaverse, where actually we're living on a network of decentralized assets, decentralized existence, the ability to decentralize technology development and allow the users to co-design what do they mean when they want a private existence in the metaverse, what data aspects would govern the distribution model of specific open data and open management within the metaverse. What does it mean when it comes to having an open identity or a shared identity or an anonymous identity within the metaverse? These are concepts which are not typically endorsed when it comes to designing for reliable and robust secure systems in the current reality that we're living in. But it's a concepts that we have to design for. And I agree as well with my fellow panelists. The design process for security has never been a monolithic approach where actually computer scientists or engineers should design for it. It should have been from the get-go a design perspective of a community and society where social scientists, psychologists are being involved for us to build a mindful technology, for us to build a reliable, sustainable technology in long term. Today, if you asked us, can we build a metaverse that would work in wearable, lightweight devices? No, because we did not opt for it. Even within the way we have built for our post-quantum computing algorithms that would provide for security, they don't provide the same metric of lightweight existence that would exist on these kind of devices. So we need to redesign what we have designed at the moment to accommodate for this kind of wearable computations. We need as well to redesign the way we are thinking of alternative computing. Why is it only quantum? Why isn't it quantum plus edge computing or memory computations to support as well the ability for applying computations from edge devices if we're not connected to the cloud somehow? I mean, there are many questions here in the way we are developing technology that needs to be a bit different and a bit away from the current norm and narrative that we're building it.
Thank you, Hoda.
Thank you, Hoda. It's
you know, what a survey. I asked you for a priority list, and you sure gave us one. So I thank you for that.
Thank you for that.
But I have a quick question for the rest of the panel. And that is, you know, terms like safety by design are well understood in the tech community in the Bay Area, but to the general public, they're not so well understood. And I'd like to ask, first I'd like to ask Philip, sort of how to, when the police hear safety by design, when you hear that term, what does it mean? And to Joe, to democratic society, what does that mean, or what should that mean? So Philip, if you'd like to start.
Thanks, Chris. And well, good question. And I think it is important to, it's easy said, security, safety and privacy by design, but I think it is important to, make this more concrete and say what we actually mean by that. So safety by design to me is actually a bigger concept than, if you will, it depends on your definition, than security and privacy by design. It really is, it covers security aspects, but it also covers aspects like, what are the risks for potential, abuse, for online harassment, for online harm, and approaching, sort of having a human-centric approach when you design software and hardware and, the metaverse, if you will. I mean, very practical terms, that would mean, what are the reporting features that you have in your system, do you have, the tools, as a provider of a metaverse platform, Do you have the tools, the processes, the people with the skills to deal with harassment, with online abuse, with hate speech? Do you have the connections to, law enforcement, to NGOs, to other organizations that you need to speak to and that you need to, work with to address those risks? So I think it comes down to, the nitty gritty, if you will, as well. But I think that conceptually, for me, safety by design really means to have a human-centric approach to almost predict and proactively, think about how human beings, we all interact with software, with hardware, with systems, how we behave online, and we've heard many, many different examples, and then take that and say, okay, what are the risks, what are the opportunities, and then together, again, what can we do to mitigate those risks? I hope that was specific enough.
Thank you so much. Thank you for that, Phil. And I'm so sorry, Joe, but we have Hannah back, and I'd really like to pull Hannah into this conversation. So Hannah really spends a lot of time looking at risks in the current information and cyber environment. And what kind of vulnerabilities do you see in the metaverse in the future, and what threats have we not thought of yet? So over to you, Hannah. Okay, Hannah, if your microphone isn't working, are we good? Okay. Okay, so I'll have to come back to you, Joe, on the safety by design. How does the public, how does that translate to the public? We'll come back to you, Joe, and Hannah, we'll turn back to you once you get fixed.
Okay, well, that is, I mean, it's a huge question. I guess the two parts are, first of all, don't think you can disentangle the metaverse from the kind of broader political context. You can't have a kind of metaverse as a kind of safe green zone, like somehow separate from the kind of wider political discourse. If you have tensions, if you have polarization, if you have radicalization in politics generally, it is going to come into the metaverse. And this is what I mean when I say it's not a design, it's not an engineering technical solution. I think it is a social contract solution, because if there are trends which, societal trends or political trends which could be driving polarization or radicalization or a kind of angry form of politics, it's going to come into the metaverse. So that's the one thing. On the other hand, having said that, at the same time, when we work with citizens, when we work with people who have really, really different political views, who, completely polar opposites in terms of where they sit, we have we put ground rules in place. We really consider safety, the safety of facilitators, the safety of participants, and so we kind of have, it's just a lot of it is basic common sense in terms of moderation, in terms of accepted speech, in terms of how you talk to each other and how you have civic discourse. And these can be normed, it can be done through regulation, it can be pushed through the ground rules that are agreed between people, so that there can be a place for kind of engineering these sort of things. But I guess my point is, it's not just engineering, it's also kind of a political question as well, which takes us back to the social contract, takes us back to this kind of multi-stakeholder approach.
Okay, thank you, Joe. Really, I think there's such an important point that's being made here, and I think it's important that if we are going to have, I think we all agree that we need an informed public debate that anticipates, what's at stake for our future with these technologies, and have that informed public debate now so that we could be ready later. But I think first, it's so important I'm a non-tech person. I'm a humanities major. I'd like Sunita. But how do we translate this into language and things that the average person understands, that politicians understand, that the citizen stakeholders understand? And I know this original issue was brought up by Hoda, and I'd like to circle back to you, Hoda. How do we communicate this? How do we express this to citizens so that they can be a part of that informed debate?
I really do think that we have to make sure that we push for interdisciplinary technology development here. And yeah, humanists or even philosophers, even social scientists should be part of the technology development process. We are developing technology for humanity. Let's not forget that. Let's not forget the fact that in 2022, we still don't have an ethical debugger. We still have we don't have an AI ethical debugger. We still live in a world where we cannot make sure if there is a technology algorithm that would allow users not to be analyzed, not to be or give them the right to be forgotten. And maybe sometimes when technology is being developed by primarily technologists, then the technology is a bit not ideal, and I would say blind to the impact that they're bringing in humanity. So the first course of action is making sure that there is an equal seat on the table of technology development for people who are not part of the technology or the STEM field. Who are part of the STEAM field, I would say, that arts and humanities is being represented on the table. And I think then we can have this kind of holistic view of how are we developing the technology, of how can we push for all of this dialogue that we are trying to advocate for here today to be translated into meaningful technology piece that would serve the community in the right play in the right space. And that would deliver what we call humanity by design, or as well security by design, reliability by design, in its core essence.
Thank you, Hoda.
Thank you, Hoda.
Tech for humanity, really the heart of everything. The right to be forgotten. We had a debate in Brussels a few months ago where the subject was the right to unplug, to not be a part of any of this. These are all important issues for the public, not just the public at the table, but the public being part of the decision-making process. So I think we have Hannah back now, and before I move to the floor for questions, Hannah, I'd really love to talk to you about what kind of threats we haven't thought of yet.
Yeah, hi Chris. I hope the sound works now. Does it work?
It sure does. Take it away, Hannah.
Oh my God, I'm so grateful. Technology is always a challenge. Well, I was going to say so many things, but I'm going to say it really, really quick then. After studying the development of cyber and virtual threats for almost 35 years, I must say that what we need to think about is have a lot of really good technology companies building incredible things out there that we're learning to use, and we start using them as soon as they pop up. And as we started using the smartphone ones, or the social media channels that we're using, or TikTok, or now we are going into Metaverse. But at the same time, malicious actors doing the same. They're learning on where we are, how we get our information, how to influence us, and what data you can gather for both espionage and influence. And this is what I think is the biggest challenge, is that you can't predict the threat. You have to have a very great imagination to think about it, because the threat is always going to change. The platform are going to develop, the users' behavior are going to develop, and also the malicious actors' activities online, it's going to change. So what I think is the biggest challenge, Chris, is that we don't really know what the threat's to be, but we do know, just for as an example, we're talking about an environment where we are very effective. We are in the context, we are in the story. And just recently, there were 2 games on the platform Roblox that were put down because you were a soldier in a war in Ukraine. And you could be either a Russian or Ukraine soldier. And the effect of these 90,000 players that actually got the opportunity to play the game before it was put down, they are part of a story that affect both the way they see everything else, but also how they view reality. So there's so many layers, as you can hear, and I try to say it very quickly, but I hope that's okay.
It's perfectly okay. Thank you so much. So, it sounds like, the technology changes, but the intentions of threat actors will not change. Is that correct, Hannah? Did I hear you correctly?
Yeah, the intentions will not change, but the methods and the technology will give different opportunities during the way.
Thank you. And Philip, if you want to chime in on that quickly from a police standpoint, it's in the background I come from, when we look at hybrid threats, and how state actors and non-state actors would use technology for terrorism and whatnot. The pattern we saw was that the criminals were always first. It was the first to exploit a technology for malign purposes were the criminals, and then governments would follow suit. Do you see that pattern emerging as well, Philip?
Good. Well, thanks for the question, Chris, and good comments by Hannah, Hoda, and Joe. I think I just want two things. Well, first of all, just to address your question, I think so. What we see is, yes, criminals are very fast in abusing new technology, but then they're typically using well-known crime patterns, if you will. I mean, if you will, the first ransomware attack goes back to the 1980s. There was a virus called AIDS, and it was distributed via floppy disks. Again, showing my age here. So the idea was there in the 1980s. Now, of course, we have cryptocurrencies. We have a global network, and now, of course, it scales, and now it's here. But the idea was there before. When it comes to a lot of the threats that we predict for the metaverse, I think a lot of it will be things that we have seen in other spaces, and it will scale to the technology. But having said that, I mean, take deepfakes. That's no longer the future. We see so many cases where criminals, use voice emulation, publicly available tools to, mimic somebody's voice, to commit CEO fraud. Or, the latest example was the former ex-CEO of FTX, where they created the deepfake video where he was allegedly saying, I'm going to pay back the money and click here. So, they're very, very quick in first of all, adapting and using news and changes in our environment, political changes as well, as we heard before. But having said that, I think we need to be prepared that there might be completely new ways of, attacks and criminal vectors that will come with the metaverse, and, identity theft, I think, will be much more prevalent. I think the theft of digital property, of digital items, that have a certain value, but people may have actually paid real money or cryptocurrency or fiat money for that, that will become a huge issue. And then, of course, we have that convergence between cyber criminals and state-sponsored, state-condoned actors. So I think, going into that space as well, when it comes to cyber espionage or mis and disinformation and swaying the public opinion, I think we will see new patterns as well, and we will certainly see existing attacks that will scale, with the metaverse. But the other point I wanted to just make, because there was a really interesting point, I think it was Hoda or Joe, about innovation and regulation. I think the problem that I see in that space is, it's easily said, we need to globally come together, but you see that at UN, where we're currently discussing a new cybercrime convention, to get together all the different views, to align them, to have a common definition. What is cybercrime? What is terrorism? And I think, as far as I know, the UN does not have a common definition on terrorism. So I think that's also a challenge in that space. But back to you. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Philip. That's thank you. Great answer, and it's always great to hear that Europol's already thinking about these things. So we just have a few minutes left for any questions from you here in the hall or anyone else. You have a great panel up here. We could go on for 6 hours. We don't have that much time, but the question of future of democracy, the future of human security related to the metaverse. So much to cover. I mean, we could have an entire 5 days just about that. But I would like to, to this question. So I don't see any hands up. I can't see if we have any questions on the. Yes.
Yeah, I think we have a couple
I have a
of
question,
questions.
if I may.
Okay.
Go for it.
Yes.
It would be great to understand what you guys think about digital poverty
in regards to this democracy of the metaverse for everybody, because clearly there are those that have access to technologies, those that use technologies. There are clearly countries and demographics who have no access to technology. COVID was a real eye opener when all these children had to work from home, had no laptops, had no iPads, had no way of engaging with their schools and their classmates, etc. How do you think that's going to impact democracy and the security of the metaverse as it grows?
Thank you so much. I think that's a perfect question for Joe Litobarski. Joe, I know you think and talk about these things, so I'll give that one to you.
Yeah. No, this is an excellent question. I think there's three answers. The first is that any kind of, if we're having these kind of dialogues or discussions, we're trying to make them as multi-stakeholder as possible. There needs to be lots of paths into that dialogue. You can't just say, have a discussion on the future of the metaverse inside the metaverse. It has to be done outside the metaverse. It has to be done in person. It has to be done, you've got to open up as many ways for people to engage as possible. So you cannot use technology as the only way to engage. I think the second thing is, and this came up with the Conference on the Future of Europe, civil society has a really, really key role here. If you're going to engage citizens, you can't just engage citizens. You also need to engage civil society groups, organizations which represent demographics that might otherwise be excluded. This is really, really important. And this was one of the criticisms that a lot of civil society organizations had of the Conference on the Future of Europe. Felt it was, a way to kind of reach citizens directly, but it was perhaps not representative, and you're excluding people. And there's this kind of this threat of the digital divide, as you very, very rightly say. And I think the other thing is these sort of processes need to be institutionalized. They can't. I mean, I think there is definitely space for them to exist, like organizations like mine, which are outside of institutions. But if you institutionalize these processes, you can direct resources towards support inclusion. And one of the examples, for example, is a process like a citizens assembly could run for several weeks, right? And if you are on a low income, or if you're a parent, or if you have care responsibilities, you might not be able to engage with the process if you're juggling a job and all sorts of reasons. Whereas if you have, if you're on a higher income or time, if you're retired, you might really be able to engage. And this is a barrier to inclusion for people who come from marginalized, otherwise kind of excluded. And so if you institutionalize it, if you have resources for people to participate in the process, if there's a legal requirement to have time off work, or if they're given a stipend, a daily stipend, to a travel stipend, or if it's access to the metaverse, a headset or something, and that can help to address these kind of risks of exclusion.
Thank you, Joe. Great question. I think that's all the time we have tonight, but I think we'll take one last question. I'll go back to you, Kavya, for your question.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you, all of you. And I just want to be real quick, Hannah. I wanted to direct this to you via LinkedIn. I've been following you for quite some time, and I heard about cognitive warfare. Any insights as your parting thoughts on that would be really helpful. Thank you.
Well, thank you for that question, Kavya. I do believe I have a great challenge further on, and we do have a great challenge today. We are creating a cognitive infrastructure in social media platforms owned by private sector, and we are totally dependent on both the platforms' will and engagement in security questions. And we know that foreign actors are using, and malicious actors are using our cognitive infrastructure as a tool against ourselves. So we have a lot of challenges, and I maybe not see the largest challenges in metaverse itself. I might see them more in when we come to extended reality and the future. But there is something we need to discuss when it comes to critical cognitive infrastructure. It's a very important topic. So I'm glad you mentioned it, Kavya.
Okay, thank you all so much. I really ask you all if you could please give a hand to our panelists here from Abu Dhabi, Stockholm, The Hague, Vienna, and here on the island of Kefalonia in Greece. Thank you all so much. So back to you, Kavya.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you so much for dialing in from all over the world. This event couldn't be more global. So remarkable panel. So we'll just take a few minutes break and we will be right back with you at exactly 11:10 PST.